Get up and use the bathroom, go get tea, get up and go for a walk, whatever you need to do. This is all very loose and casual. There's no need for any kind of formality. So, spirituality. Spirituality is flypaper. Spirituality is a bog. Spirituality is deep, sticky mud. It serves virtually no purpose except as a distraction from being real, from being, let's just say just a distraction. Let's not worry about from what and to what. What spirituality is actually about, if it was actually about it, and it usually isn't, is simply this present phenomena, your experience that is here right now. I mean, that's what all of us is about. Just this self-evident actuality that is right here, right now. What it actually is what all the fuss is about. And of course, it already is what it actually is. Number one, and number two, what it actually is completely plain to see. It's not hidden. It's not concealed, except by its own very slippery nature. But that's not a concealment. That's just a fact. And the only impediment to seeing this astounding phenomena as it is, which happens to be in a completely amazing condition that has some rather nice implications for a being, let's say. The being that you are is actually beyond space and time, is actually beyond causality, is actually eternal, is actually in a condition of absolute fullness and completeness forever and beyond forever. And all of this is not just hyperbole, it's just a simple fact. And it's actually even an obvious fact. The only thing that obscures it and gets it in the way of noticing that fact and hence being able to appreciate it through participation in that fact ongoingly is our confused ideas that it's otherwise. And spirituality certainly does its fair share of contributing to the noise in the system, contributing to the misinformation campaign that humans are so expert at propagating among each other about what we really are and what this really is.
Could you give us a couple, for instances, when you have a lot of confused ideas?
Oh yeah, we'll be going into this all day.
Okay.
You'll be sick of it. This is just an opening shot.
Yeah.
And of course, it's human normalcy to wallow in and to propagate these erroneous interpretive frameworks of what this self-evident fact, this self-evident condition actually is. So we're continually immersed in a semantic sea of misinformation, of confused and erroneous implication about what we are, about what this is, about how it works, about what's happening, and so on and so forth. And as a result, most people are hopelessly confused about what they actually are and what's actually going on here, which gives rise to anxiety, fear, sense of lack, sense of incompleteness, senses of failure, sense of vulnerability, fear of death, all these kinds of things, which are just epidemic among normal human beings. And it's absolutely needless. It doesn't need to be that way, because what this is and the way that it is plain to see. But again, there is such a plethora of misinformation being propagated, not least of which by spirituality itself, and spiritual circumstances, and spiritual institutions, and spiritual teachers, and the whole deal, all the isms, and and the entities. So the challenge is for an individual to bypass the sea of brainwashing that we've been immersed in from the get-go, pretty much, and notice what's actually happening, what's actually right here, right now, and it's always been completely self-evident. The reason all this misinformation can persist so solidly and so blatantly in the face of explicit evidence to the contrary, explicit evidence that it's wrong completely, is the fact that the nature of what this condition is, this actuality that is here is such that it's very slippery, it's very subtle, so it's amenable to all kinds of interpretations and can apparently be interpreted that way. So a little bit like maybe a Rorschach blot or something, where you can see it as being this, or see it as being that, or see it as being the other, and it kind of looks as if it is. So it's not. So what it actually is, the nature of this actual condition is slippery. It's subtle. It's nuanced, which is not a problem at all. Nothing wrong with slippery, subtle, and nuanced. It's a whole lot of fun, in fact. But again, the problem is that it doesn't blatantly contradict any interpretation one comes up with. Now, all human interpretive frameworks are wrong. And basically anything constructed of words or ideas is an interpretive framework. So, all political systems are inaccurate. All scientific systems are inaccurate. All philosophical frameworks are inaccurate. All religious frameworks are inaccurate. All spiritual and yogic and practical frameworks are inaccurate, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. Intrinsically, not that some of them aren't very clever and very brilliantly executed and implemented and so on, but they fail because the nature of what this is such that it cannot be captured in concepts. It cannot be captured in thoughts or ideas. It cannot be modeled. The only model of this that is possible is it itself. The only simile you can make about what's this like, it's like itself. It's not like anything else. And so, of course, all of these interpretive frameworks would say it's like this, it's like that, it's like the other, are just pulling assertions out of their hat and then letting them rest as if they're certain axioms. And it gets unchallenged because it kind of seems as if it might be true. And it's really hard to prove that it isn't true because things are kind of that way. Again, it's a matter of not really looking at the detail, not really being precise, just sort of being with averages. And which brings us to the real nature of discovery. The process of discovery of what this is and the actual nature of what this is all about precision. It's all about specificity. It's all about going to precisely what experience is and precisely the way it is. Much spirituality is sort of, there's an implicit idea that you have to kind of phase out or fuzz out or go into some kind of a squishiness, but it's exactly the opposite of that. The squishiness is the problem. The vagueness and imprecision is the problem. In actual fact, this is exactly the way it is, and exactly the way this is completely and utterly transcendental. And when you discover that fact, self-verifyingly and obvious and objectively the case, you discover that you are that as well. And that's kind of nice. It's kind of a win-win-win-win-win situation. So, what I advocate, what I present, I claim, is what I call the yoga of radiant presence, which is nothing other than looking very closely and very precisely at your actual experience in real time, any portion of your experience, doesn't matter where you look, and looking and seeing what's there and how it's there, what's actually there and how it's there. You know, look at vision and look at light. What is light? How is it there? How is it being perceived? How is it present? What is the presence of light? You know, look at thought. What is thought? What is there? What is thought made of? How is it present? Where is it? You know, and not with an expectation of getting answers to questions, being formative like that, because again, it happens that the way the nature of this is such that it's completely beyond being captured in words. So you're not going to get an answer that you can, you know, use as a definition or something. But it's just a jumping off point of engagement, of being very precisely with what experience actually is. And basically doing this will lead you, so to speak, into the discovery of what this actually is, which completely transcends anything that has ever been said or thought about it. Not that it's all absolutely wrong. It's just it's completely wrong by omission. It's completely wrong by being incomplete. That's kind of a rough sketch of the reason I'm up here. So we can fill it in any way that you all find interesting or you're curious about, or that, you know, anything that doesn't make sense about what I just said. Yes.
You said who we are is beyond space and time.
Yes.
Let's some other things about that. Anyway, let's just do that. Beyond space and time.
It's a good starting point.
That's obvious.
Yes.
That's not that obvious to me. Actually, what does that even mean, beyond space and time?
It means that any idea you can have of what space is, and any idea you can have of what time is grossly inaccurate. Mm-hmm. It's not that time and space don't exist, it's that what they are is utterly and completely and inconceivably vastly beyond what anyone has ever thought them to be. So, you know, for example, you know, we might have a simplistic idea of time. Well, there's the past and the future and the present, and here we are, we're in the present, and we're kind of moving from the past into the future. Blah, blah. But if you look experientially, in actual fact, it's always now, right? And you are never in the past, you are never in the future. So past and the future is actually a ramification of the mutability of apparent circumstances. So apparent circumstances are absolutely unstable in the sense that they have no circumstance persists for any duration at all in any specific condition. It all is morphing in real time, which is, you know, observably the case. The way in which that's the case is also kind of strange, but let's not get into that now. That's getting ahead of ourselves. So the whole theory of time is basically an implication erected upon this fact of the absolute instability of perceived present circumstances, right? So the instability of perceived present circumstances is what time really is. And it always happens now. There is no past, there is no future. You know, so the supposition that there is a prior state of affairs or a present state of affairs that is somehow morphing into a future state of affairs is an over-elaboration which is entirely inaccurate. There is no past state of affairs. There may be memory of a virtual past state of affairs, but that memory is actually a present state of affairs. And there may be anticipation of a future state of affairs, but that anticipation is a present state of affairs. And the actual relationship of this different aspects of the present state of affairs to each other is very strange and inscrutable. So what's the relationship of presently existing memory to presently existing sensory perception, for example? They coexist, but to leap to the conclusion that of the simplistic theory of an actual flow of time with an actual past and an actual future is very heavy-handed and clumsy. And then we have notions like causality, which are included in that. We can see that in terms of our memory of past states of affairs and present states of affairs, we can see there seems to be a more or less gradual transition of one condition leading to another condition that bears some apparent relationship to it, and so on. In other words, you drop something and you see it, you experience it in your hand, you experience it seeming to open your hand, you experience it seeming to fall, and you experience it in your ground state. And the supposition as well, the one state of affairs led to another as some kind of a continuum in time. And that's, it's just sort of a normal sloppy consensus reality conception. But if you look very precisely at all of that, it's stranger than that. It's not that, it's not that there is no time, but it's that time is vastly more and stranger than a simplistic idea of it. And the same argument can be applied to space and so on. I mean, for example, where is your experience? It's here. It's always here. It's never not here. So, where is space? Space is here, experientially. There, where is there? There is here. So I see a house across the road, and I might think that's there, and I'm here. But in actuality, the experience of the house is here. So where is this here that the house is? In other words, where am I experiencing this from? That's an unanswerable question, because it's not a spatial phenomenon. All space occurs within the perception of space, but the perception of space doesn't occur within space. If you look and see, it doesn't seem to be an adequate, accurate way of approaching it, and so on. And all of this is just deconstructive arguments to challenge a normal way of thinking of these things of space and time in this example. But that's just a jumping off point. It doesn't say it's not that, it's this. It says it's not that, look and see what it is. And there is no what it is that you'll settle upon, because what it is intrinsically too subtle, too weird, too infinite to settle into a particular way of being. It is as it is, but that as it is an unresolvability, which explicitly and completely and obviously transcends the normal way of holding it, which is the important point.
Because we're always trying to, it's this,
Exactly.
It's this, and we're just labeling it.
Right. Yeah, we're trying to get a handle on what's going on, what it is. It's this. And as soon as you say it's this, you've created a caricature of it, and the reality itself is going to vastly exceed your caricature. And that's always going to be the case, because no matter how sophisticated a caricature you come up with, it's going to pale in the face of the actuality. Because the actuality, I like this word transcendental. It kind of nicely indicates the condition that is discoverable, that this is, that it is by its very nature unresolvable, and not as a failure to resolve it. That's what it is. It's not. Its nature is divergent. It doesn't cohere into a coherent whole. So it's a very strange critter that we have here.
And yet it seems like when you think of thought or something, you mentioned last night that there are infinite layers.
Apparently, sure.
And
seem to be.
When you think of it, you sort of you get a hit of many different layers.
Sure, you might.
You get this sort of richness
Sure.
of it.
Sure.
But yet you focus on that surface.
Well, you may or may not focus focus on the richness, but even if you focus on the richness, it doesn't resolve into a simple richness that, okay, now I got the richness, it's this.
Right.
You get the richness, but then the richness is just a door to vastness that completely transcends being a simple condition.
But you get kind of echoes.
Yes, echoes. Yeah, this is an infinite echoes of itself. Experience presents as infinite echoes of reality, and all the echoes are of reality, are true, and none of them accurately and completely capture the whole. And yet all you have is the echoes. So it's a very strange situation we have here. But it's strange and subtle, because what this is intrinsically unresolvable. In other words, it does not come into coherence. The closer you get to it, the more it seems to be paradoxical. And it is that. And yet, you can know that is the case. Let me put it this way. You can resolve with absolute certainty the fact that it is unresolvable. It is intrinsically unresolvable. So you can know this even though you can't pin it down. You can know that you can't pin it down. Because what you are is what this is. This is transcendental and inconceivable and paradoxical, but what you actually are is exactly the same. So you have the capability to meet it where it is, to be with it in its modes, even though we're addicted to following sort of logical and linear human modes of argument and so on and so forth. And yet you can and do completely transcend those modes. So you can be with this as it is, because you are with this as it is.
Now it seems like one of the blocks of our being able to do that is our complete familiarity with it, because we are the same thing. We kind of don't.
But the block isn't the familiarity. The block is a subliminal interpretive framework. We think we know what it is in a sense that's actually a simplification.
Right.
And it is not actually a simplification. It's actually unsimplifiable. So we think we know the space and time, and we think we're in a body, and we think we're in our lives, and we think we're this, and we think we're, however it is, we whatever it's a sort of framework we're holding of sort of a typically unconsciously held mental map of what's going on, right? And that map is actually completely inaccurate. Not because it's wrong as far as it goes, but because it's gross oversimplifications of an actual condition which completely and utterly transcends those simplifications. And this is knowable. This is directly seeable. And again, the way to see it is look at experience itself and discover the way in which any experience transcends what you're used to thinking of it as being. Look at location, look at duration, look at focus. Focus is an interesting thing to look at. I mean, it doesn't matter where you look. Anywhere you look in experience, you will discover exactly the same condition. The condition that what is present and the way in which it's present is actually and obviously, even when you take the care to look precisely, completely beyond any way you may be used to thinking of that. Yeah.
So I'm thinking what I was reading recently with Krishnamurti talking about becoming, and he's saying, I don't know how to say it, but basically we're not becoming, that's time and striving or what have you. And I'm aware of so many spiritualities saying that we have to evolve, we have to become more, blah, 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 blah.
Well, you heard what I said about spirituality in the beginning of the talk. So.
Yeah. But I want to make it more concrete, if that's even possible. So, so then a person could say, well, what is one to do?
Sure.
Just be in this moment, not try to improve. And then I've had people argue about, well, then we can be negative if we want to be negative.
Sure.
So, all these little swimmings going about
Sure.
Is it worthwhile? Well, I think it is, but I'll ask you to, be aware of one's emotional states and kind of get my drift.
You can do anything you're able to do, and in actual fact, there's no harm, no foul. There's no reason not to do anything you're capable of doing. So if you want to be aware of emotional states, have at it. If you want to do self-improvement, have at it. If you want to do therapies and straighten out your emotional condition, have at it. It's all good, right? Who cares? But the only thing, from my point of view, from the point of view of true spirituality, the only thing you can do that actually matters is discover what this is, discover what you are. And that discovery does not involve or preclude any other mode. In other words, that discovery is not dependent upon anything you do or don't do. And you're free to do or not do anything you want. I mean, there are plenty of people out there robbing banks and raping children and killing people and taking drugs and all that. So obviously that's possible. Right? And from a spiritual point of view, that's completely irrelevant. There's other people out there saving the whales and improving themselves and going to therapy and getting self-awareness and all that. And that's also doable. And more power to them. But from the spiritual point of view, it's just irrelevant. It has nothing to do. The important thing is not what happens. The important thing is to see what it is, what it's made of, how it appears, how it's actually working, which completely transcends any way we think it's working. So we have all these stories about what we think we're doing, and they're all grossly and completely and utterly inaccurate. So, I'm trying to do this, and I'm trying to do that, and I'm trying to avoid this. Cool. But that's not true. It's fine. It's not like you need to not have these stories. I mean, stories are great, and in fact, they're inevitable. As human beings, it seems to be our native mode. I mean, this is another important point that we haven't really touched on yet today, that human modes are spontaneous. They appear inherently. All this thought and analysis and spinning out interpretive frameworks, it's not like interpretive frameworks are bad. They're just inaccurate. And your mind will continue to spin out interpretive frameworks because it's the nature of mind to analyze. The mind is an analyzing machine.
So it's just automatic.
Yeah, sure, of course. Everything's automatic. So all aspects of human nature continue to occur, and they don't need to not occur. It's not a matter of don't do interpretive frameworks or don't do this or don't do that. It doesn't matter whether you do or not do. The point is to see what it is. But the only thing that matters is seeing what a thing is, not whether or not it happens. So there's no restraint or lack of restraint necessary. And in that case, you're free to follow your temperament and your nature, which of course you're going to do anyway.
Thank you for that. As a real beginner at this stuff, I've always had it in the back of my mind that okay, I've got to stop thinking, or notice my breath all the time, or stop those interpretive frameworks, or not be living through these interpretive frameworks, before I've got a shot at me.
Stop thinking. Stop thinking, stop having sex, stop breathing, stop eating, stop enjoying.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and all these kinds of notions are spread through sort of overly simplistic, spiritual misunderstandings, like which I started the talking about. There's all this supposedly spiritual information floating around, some of which is more or less coherent with others of which, and some of which isn't. But it's all hogwash. None of it is actually accurate. Because there is no accurate information about this actuality, because it cannot be captured in description. It cannot be captured in symbols or in maps or in ideas or in words.
The beautiful thing about what you just said is that it's not as if these various frameworks are wrong or bad, or they're just inaccurate.
Yeah, exactly. They're approximations. And approximations are fine, but if you don't know the approximation is an approximation, you can draw erroneous conclusions from it.
All the time.
And exactly, and this is the very essence of the spiritual problem.
Right.
Is drawing conclusions from our own approximations and assuming they're actually accurate.
All day.
Yeah. No, this is the normal human normalcy. And it's possible. The good news is it's possible and even easy to discover that these approximations are inaccurate. At which point the knee-jerk reaction of buying into the implications just fades away and stops having a grip, stops having teeth.
Well, that's encouraging.
Yeah.
And so that actually happens.
Huh? Yeah. This can happen, and it actually can be easy.
And easy how? By the act of noticing, or?
Yeah, easy in the sense that there's no inherent impediment to seeing this fact. You could see it right now very clearly. Or not, you might not. But if you don't see it, it's not because it's hard to see. If you don't see it, it's because of being. Well, hey, let me give you a nice little buzz phrase. Here comes a bumper sticker.
Right.
Reality is very easy to see, but unreality is very hard to let go of. So, seeing reality is not really the problem, but letting go of one's addiction to unreality is really more the challenge in practical terms in spirituality. Because we're creatures of habit. We tend to function, the horse knows its way to the barn and that's where it's going. And this applies in our mental functioning and conceptual functioning as well. So,
But isn't this the manifestation of this addiction to unreality, that's really thinking about what is going on, right? Mm-hmm. So it is thought it seems like it is sort of the.
Well, yes, but it's more complex and subtle than that because it's a whole gestalt of thought and emotion and belief, and in a subtle sense, it can be said to be kind of a energy orientation without worrying too much about exactly what that means. But it's sort of a way of how one sits with one's experience. And again, that's sort of obviously a vague metaphorical way of putting it. But yeah, thought, it's part of thought, but it's basically about beliefs. These interpretive frameworks are belief structures, and of course exactly what that is slippery. But thought's an aspect of it, but because they are believed and held, let's say multidimensionally rather than simply conceptually, they're hard to root out by thought. So it's hard to think your way out of a belief system. Yeah. You need a little more punch, a little more pow somehow.
So you can see why people say, okay, well then you need to stop thinking.
Sure.
Thinking is what's taking away from this.
Right, but that's a misunderstanding because first of all it's impossible, and second of all, the existence of thought isn't the problem. It's the erroneous faith that thought has any accuracy that's the problem. When you get that no thought is accurate, no thought can be accurate, no thought can actually accurately represent or present an actual condition. Just axiomatically, that's just the case across the board. It cannot be done because the nature of what this is such that it cannot be captured by anything but itself. So this is why what I recommend, again, is sort of more repeated experiential investigation rather than sort of analysis, rather than trying to undermine it by thought. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with a multi-pronged attack. Argument is great. But what really is the kicker, I think what really has the most staying power and the most impact is to notice you're having transcendental experience, and then it will be very obvious that your thought can't possibly wrap around that. So when you have a direct experience, you look at something and say, okay, how is this being experienced? What is being experienced? Like now I'm looking at your head, I'm seeing your face, right? How is that happening? How can this happen? What's happening here? What is present here? I can say, oh, consciousness is light's appearing in consciousness. Bullshit. What's light? What's consciousness? Here's the actualities. What is it that is here? And it's palpable. You can feel and engage and know what's here, even though you can't define it or say what it is or how it works. And then you'll discover that all of our elaborate ways of, parsing it into an interpretive narrative are just absurd, bullshit. They're pretentious arrogance of, and it all comes from our early training. We're, humans. You come into the world, you're a baby, and you're like, right? And mom comes along and says, I'm mom, and you're like, and eventually one day you say, mama. And mom goes, oh, good, you said that's what I'm mom. And you say, mama again. And all of a sudden, you're in this training dog Pavlovian thing of reinforcement for being a trained seal and regurgitating these symbols back, because you're getting energetic strokes for it. You're getting, all of this wash of affection and attention and all this stuff, which is itself transcendental. And so basically we're trained to have an arrogance of pretending we know what anything is and what's going on. And of course it's very interesting psychologically because we all know inside we don't. We all know inside we're faking it, which is the basis for the epidemic insecurity and sort of self-doubt and self-loathing that permeates human psychology. Because everyone knows they're faking it. It's very important for us to put up a good front. To pretend you know what's going on, and hi, I'm Peter Brown, and I live in San Rafael, and I'm this, and I'm that, and this is this, and that's that, and boy, don't I know a lot of stuff. And it's all bullshit. It's all arrogant, pretentious bullshit. I don't know shit. I know now exactly what I knew when I was popping out of my mother's womb, which is. But I'm really good at pretending all this stuff and regurgitating, playing this game, exchanging these counters that we call words, You throw some counters at me and I throw some counters at you and we're like, oh, that was a good game,
Yeah, well, I was thinking, when you were speaking earlier, a couple of things. One was that Groucho Marx had it right when you were talking about similarities, right? It says what's most like a half an orange, the other half of the orange, right? Then the other thing is, for a number of years I was running around looking for, how was I going to define a specific kind of pine tree, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then I ran into Korzybski and I said, okay, here's the word tree, right? And it can be broken down into pine trees and other trees, et cetera, et cetera. You keep breaking it down. But even if you look at a single pine tree, that's not the same as another pine tree. And even if you look
it's not even the same as itself, depending on what part of it you're looking at.
Yeah, right. So, like you say, it's miraculous. It's
yeah. Yeah. And the point is not to get a handle on that miraculousness, just to notice that it's the case. Just to notice, like, wow, just plain wow. Just get some wow factor, And after a while, you'll notice there's nothing but. I mean, this is pure, unuttered, unadulterated, 100% wow. And anyway, and if it doesn't feel like that, then you're supplying the impediment. You're imagining the whatever it is that's keeping it from obviously and really explicitly and blatantly presenting itself. Interpretive frameworks act as a censorship. It's like a hypnotic, it acts like through a mechanism, it's essentially hypnotic, or the same thing as what hypnosis is, whatever that is. But anyway, it's a censorship. the full experience is always present, but an interpretive framework can seem to make areas of it cut off from explicit perception. It doesn't actually cut anything off. Everyone is actually always experiencing the full spectrum of reality. It's not like you need to learn to do something you're not already doing or develop some hidden capacity. It's really just a matter of let yourself notice that you're already doing that and you never stop doing that. Because it's what you are. You know, you're an experiencing miracle. That's all you are. And but these interpretive frameworks, basically, their effect is they censor it. They create a kind of a tunnel vision where it dumbs it down, and you only notice small aspects of what's present. And so it's a kind of a virtual limiting, creating a virtual limitation in experience. So experience seems smaller, it seems less, it seems, it gets pared down to things that can be grasped conceptually, even though it's not actually being pared down. It's only being virtually pared down through this very strange hypnotic mechanism, or however that works.
I'll just say, I really sense that.
Sure, well, it's obvious. It's really quite obvious. I mean, all this stuff is obvious. It's easy. I mean, people can, spend, their lifetimes on the spiritual quest, and yet you can see this stuff and get the truth of it in an instant.
Yeah.
Or not. And there's no way to contrive that or do that deliberately.
Not to go paragliding or ziplining, which of course I'm not going to do. I would just rather be able to expand that vision.
Yeah. And you don't even need to expand it, just notice that it's already expanded. You're already experiencing outside of the limitation. Just let yourself notice you are. And again, the way of chipping away at that is by being with a direct, immediate experience. It's just a sensory experience. It doesn't need to be anything sophisticated or elaborate. It doesn't matter where you look. You can look in any sense field. You can look in thought. You can look in just a sense of presence. It doesn't matter what it is. Any actuality, just engage with intelligence and presence with what is actually there. What is this experience? And not analytically, not asking a question, expecting an answer, but just feel it and let it show you what it is. It's instead of saying look, it's probably better to say feel. Experience is felt. All of our euphemisms for experience, look or hear, listen or, think. They're all euphemisms for feeling. Light is felt in consciousness. Sound is felt. It's a felt presence. Sensation is a felt presence. Thought is a felt presence. So when you feel, feel the presence of light. You're already doing that. So when I say do that, just really direct your attention, engage with that fact, feel the presence of light and see what's happening. What is it that's present? How is it present? How is it being perceived? And again, not the questions, not the words, not an answer.
I had a little taste of that. That's really, and it was touching emotionally. That's
This stuff is good. It'll send you for a loop. It's much better than acid. Speaking from experience.
Peter, do you call it the radiance of yoga because when you are noticing it has a radiance? I've noticed that when I'm noticing or when I'm in that field, that it is radiant. And when I'm in the thought field, that it's not devoid of light, but it's more variegated with little pops sometimes of light.
Sure. Okay. I mean, I have I use the terminology yoga of radiant presence very specifically, because what this is completely unsayable and unspeakable and undefinable in concepts or in words. But these two words, or radiant presence, are the two that most closely indicate or jumping off points to what it actually is. Now, it's subtle because there's two words and yet it's one thing. So the presence is the radiance and the radiance is the presence. But if you look at it, presence, experience is present, right? It's a self-evident fact that your experience is present. Well, what is that presence? I mean, look at, okay, so this is present, undeniably. It's an axiom. You can't question it. Maybe it's not present. It's like, give me a break. Experience is present. What is that? What actuality is that referring to? What is presence? And again, you feel that. Yeah, it's just presence. No doubt about it. And there is no experience that is not present. And no experience is more or less present than another experience. Presence is an absolute constant. You could say, you are present. Your experience is present. What you're seeing or hearing or thinking or vibing is present. But those are all just elaborations of the same thing. That presence is. And presence always presents qualitatively. There's no such thing as a naked presence. Presence always shows up in costume. Presence always shows up in drag. So.
What does that mean?
What
does that mean?
Drag?
No. Shows up. Break it down for me.
Presence appears.
Oh, okay.
Presence appears. Presence isn't just is. The isness of presence is always an appearing. There is nothing but experience, and experience is always something.
Okay.
It can be a surpassingly subtle something. It can be an inconceivably weird and bizarre and transcendental and amorphous something, but it's never a blatant nothing, never a non-existence. So there's look at all these colors and shapes and brightnesses and sounds and frequencies and tingles and sensations and thought flavors and moods and vibes and emotions. It's just this inconceivable sea of qualities, and it's continually morphing and wafting as your field of experience, right? It's always there. You go to sleep and it completely changes its tenor, but it's not like anything gets removed. It's not like the field of vision isn't full when you're asleep. It's just full of a different, subtler sort of a range of dynamism. Right? In the field of sensation, it doesn't cease. These fields don't cease, they just morph into... So, radiance can present as anything, but always as something. So radiance can present as light, as sound, as thought, as vibes, as inconceivable weirdnesses we don't have names for. But it'll always be something. It always has a flavor, a characteristic, a nuance.
I just want to say, when you were kind of offering me your guidance, it was just really quite remarkable, quite palpable.
Yeah.
Something appeared to shift, and things just became more alive.
Yeah. And this is palpable right now. Do it right now. It's always this. It's always this right here. It's always in the middle.
I can sense this is in my way.
Sure. But it's not actually in your way. It just claims to be in your way. It pretends to be in your way. Because you're also outside that at the same time you're inside it. You're not actually in your mind. Your mind is happening like your vision. If you look in the whole field of your experience, suppose your experience is like a big bubble. So look where your vision is. Here's your vision floating like a kind of a sideways ovoid with fuzzy edges, right? Mm-hmm. It's floating in your experience. Now, where is your thought relative to it? Thought is kind of in its own little bubble somewhere, right? They don't get in each other's way. They sort of exist in different dimensions. Mm. Now look at where your hearing is. And so your hearing is floating in its own little dimension, its little bubble or whatever. Obviously you can't pin it down. But it doesn't get in the way of the bubble of vision. They coexist in different dimensions. So thought is just that bubble. You're not actually in it. It's present. But, for example, your field of vision, there's no thought in your field of vision. And there's no vision in your field of thought. Because they exist in different bandwidths, you might say. Just look at your experience and see if this is so.
So maybe it's actually true that I'm not present, and so everything seems kind of gray.
Well, you are present, but you see, that's like a hypnotic condition. Oh. It's not actually the case. It's not the case that you are not present, because you are present, because your experience is. If your experience exists, then that is presence. And presence by its very nature is infinite. It cannot be finite. It cannot be limited. Anyway, the point isn't to beat yourself up about feeling stuck or not being able to see or anything. The point is to flirt with it, play with it, and you will discover that the more you sort of notice this, be with experience through feeling it. Feel your experience. Feel light. Feel sound. Feel thought. Feel emotion. Feel whatever vibes. Just feel these things, and you'll notice that you're in a context that you have no words for. You're in a context that you cannot possibly explain or describe to anyone, and you're in a context that completely transcends what you're normally used to thinking of yourself as being and doing. In other words, you're outside the human framework. But you're not actually a human being. So that's easy to be outside the human framework because you already are. Being a human being is a claim of the interpretive framework. What you are is a transcendental radiant presence. In actual fact, it's just simply the case. And this is directly discoverable, directly noticeable, directly knowable, and self-verifyingly obvious. And the trick is just, play with it, flirt with it, explore it, and you will discover that that's the case. And the more you flirt with it, the easier it will be to do. And the easier it is to do, the easier it will be to do in the future, and eventually it's just completely self-evident. That's a lot of stuff. We've been talking for about an hour, at least I have. Why don't we take a 5-minute break and stretch and get some tea and whatever you need to do, and we'll reconvene. Let's just make it just like 5 minutes, just a little while, and we'll have lunch in an hour at around noon, so we'll get a good long break then. I know it can be sort of wearing to be bombarded by all of this blah blah.
And how interested in listening to this again? I don't know. I would find this on your...
The audio files, I record all my talks and they're available for free on my website.
Yeah, bring to the date.
Yes, they're posted by date. And so you'll be able to, when I finally get around to putting this up there, which will be before too very long, vaguely. I'm lazy. But sooner or later it will be on my website under that date, and there'll be just a link there with the date on it. And you just click on that and you'll be able to hear it in your browser. Or you can also download the file, it's an MP3, and you can put it into a... Okay, cool. Anyway, if you have a computer, just click on it and it's there.
And the link says...
It'll have the date.
The link, what does the link say that you press?
It'll look like the date today. You go to there's a page on my website called Audio Visual. If you go to that page, and the top of that page, there's a bunch of different stuff about places you can go and things you can do. But then when you get to the bottom of the page, there's a big long stretch which is just lists of dates, like lots of them, like dozens of dates. And each of those dates is a link to an audio recording. And if you click on any one of those, you'll hear the audio, unedited audio from that date, from that time. And today should be likewise.
Go back to Wally dog lectures. Yeah, it was war and what it was. He's in the trench. All this is oh yeah. There's a neutral. It's like these bullets aren't getting or something. It's a neutral. I'm afraid of this. Arguing with logical margins that one's sure. But the thing is, he said, yeah, one guy in this color line. Springboard episodes that will always when you're in our life, we don't fit. Yes, no, I love that. Anyway, I thought about his teaching to me was 30 years ago. I wasn't really long. You put on your yeah. The one who was sitting next to you. Yeah. Hard from the other. Peter. I know. He said he's printed out posters. He's got them all on my binders. Well, there you go. You never know. If he applied to you. So the seeds you're planting are taking you. So I would the point is,
Peter, I don't think I understand yet why you chose the word radiance.
Okay, well, we'll talk about it when we get back together.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Ask me again.
I will.
I'm taking a 5-minute break online, people. Peter, your chai rocks.
Yeah, you good?
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry I ran out of next time. You did? Yeah. Where do you have it? So
Yeah, exactly. We're still settling in, but we're doing good. You know, I gave my piano away. We gave away so much stuff. Funds and stuff. We really should.
Are we back? Let's pretend we're back.
Mona's still
Okay. Well, wait a moment.
This is just a comment. I was looking at that explanation of like the artwork there. It seems like what your talks are sort of like this is the explanation of what you're seeing right now. Without it, you might not know.
Any explanation I could come up with won't touch what it really is.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to, because what it really is right here. So check it out. All right. We're back-ish. So welcome back to the second fun-filled hour of our day together.
So I was going to ask about
Yes.
the word radiance.
Yes.
It sounds like a visual thing. But
Radiant to me, I use it to imply more dynamism, an activity. Radiance implies a shining forth. Whether or not it's shining, obviously the shining aspect implies visual again. But all experiential qualities seem to have an intrinsic dynamism or vitality or explosiveness. That all these qualities are just continually coming into your experience. Without you don't need to go to light and coax it to come to you. You can't stop it. You close your eyes and you still don't stop it. There's still all this light, all these little flickers and so on. Go to sleep and you still don't stop it. There's still light, so on and so forth. So it's unceasingly, unstoppably shining forth as experiential qualities. And again, shining and radiant may imply a visual kind of a bias, but the same sort of quality applies to all experience. You can think of it as radiant energy rather than just radiant light. So experiential characteristics present as if they were a kind of energy with an intrinsic positivity, an intrinsic, creativity, whatever. And this is palpable. You can, what we call the flow of time and all this is this unstoppable, dynamism of energy, whatever. Again, all this is very euphemistic, but still in all, to me, it's evocative of the actuality, the dynamism of the actuality, and positivity is a good word. Not positive as meaning good, but positive as meaning active, dynamic.
do you sense directionality?
Maybe. Its directionality is all direction. It has a directionality that is its direction, you could say. God knows what that is. Every direction is its direction. And yet it's doing exactly what it's doing and exactly the way it's doing. That's one of the stymieing and astounding and endlessly weird aspects of this actuality, is it's exactly the way it is. Why is it exactly this way? Why isn't it some other? Why does it look like this room with this group of people sitting in it, having exactly these shapes appear in your field of vision, and exactly these sounds appear, and exactly these sensations, whatever you're feeling, and emotions or whatever, subtle vibes, whatever it is an experience in real time? Why is it exactly like that and not some other way? What's it doing? Obviously, it's totally unanswerable. And it's even unaccessible whether or not it's even relevant in any sense, but it's interesting. I have a theory or a kind of a poetic framing of it, that it has some intrinsic process or nature that it is unfolding, and its process is happening to be exactly the way it happens to be. But of course, that's completely beyond human analysis and conceivability. So it's other than that may be the case in some sense. There's no point trying to look any further, and it's pure speculation, and it's irrelevant. The nice thing about this yoga, the nice thing about true spirituality, is you don't need to make sense about anything. You just need to, you don't need to find out what is going on. You don't need to analyze it. You don't need to get the answers. You just need to discover that you, in fact, don't have the answers, which gives you access to the vitality and fullness of what you actually are, what this actually is, which is it's been called enlightenment. It's what's been called liberation. All those things, because you are liberated from the erroneous virtual limitation of being in a human condition and being stuck in a life in space-time and causality, because you discover that in actuality you are not in those conditions, which has a very different feeling tone and is really rather quite delightful.
So you say it has a very different feeling tone. It's like, it almost has to be aesthetic then, right?
It's absolutely aesthetic. Experience is aesthetic.
Because there's nothing else other than just that apprehension of beauty or whatever, or
sure.
Apprehension of all art, whatever.
Absolutely. Reality itself is an apprehension of beauty, you want to call it, or an apprehension of what it is, which is certainly astoundingly beautiful and amazing and so on and so forth. Yeah, experience is felt. The engagement with experience is a felt phenomena, whatever that means. Consciousness engages with experience as a full frontal, total body, so to speak, engagement, with no intermediary, with no distance, with no mediation whatsoever, absolute intimacy. And so this is certainly felt, and it's certainly aesthetic, and all aspects of experience are aesthetic. Color is felt aesthetically, light is felt aesthetically, sound is felt aesthetically, so on, thought is felt aesthetically, so on and so forth. All of these astounding details of all these experiential qualities are felt aesthetically. And it has a flavor quality, a flavor of vitality, the flavor of fullness, a flavor of exuberance, a flavor of creativity, a flavor of a profound meaningfulness. Even though it's an irrational meaningfulness that doesn't collapse into a human interpretability, still in all, it's wow.
Peter, who becomes liberated?
It's a relevant question. What you are becomes liberated from not getting to fully appreciate explicitly what you are. And, non-liberation is simply a condition of what you are, partially pretending that it's something else, being lost in a bad dream, you could say. And it's not even a bad dream. Okay, we've come upon a really good point. We've come upon a really, really good point. So this is going to be a major digression probably for the next hour or the rest of the day or whatever. A real bugaboo in spirituality, or bugaboo is a technical term, I don't know the Sanskrit for bugaboo. The real bugaboo in spirituality and in human orientation in general, in frames of reference in general, is playing one thing off against another hierarchical. This is better than that. The grass is greener over there than it is over here. Liberation is better than delusion. Openness is better than closedness. Life is better than death. Pleasure is better than pain. All of these, hierarchical plagues off is the energizing factor of addiction to interpretive frameworks, of addiction to delusion. So, and of course, it kicks into high gear when you start looking at the sort of bottom line of liberation versus delusion. But liberation is better than delusion. In actuality, no, it's not. But to discover that liberation is not better than delusion, you need to discover liberation, i.e., just discover what you actually are and have always been, at which time you'll be free to go into delusion, so-called, or interpretive frameworks with impunity, and you won't give a shit because you know it's all the same. But when you don't know it's all the same, the seduction is to entertain these fantasies of there's something better, there's something out there better, which means I'm deprived, I'm suffering, I have less, I'm needy, and all of a sudden you're just in the normal human hell of, contentious reality, lack of fullness, lack of completeness, lack of fulfillment, which is imagined into existence as a result of this mechanism of playing one condition off against another. It's a very subtle thing, and as humans we're used to doing it continually. And it's even logical to do it. Of course, all these interpretive frameworks have their arguments, their justifications. But in actuality, it is the problem. So the point of liberation is actually not liberation. The point of liberation is to discover that liberation is unnecessary, and then you're free of the craving. You're free of the addiction. And at that point, you can go wherever you want with your Teflon. You want to go into liberation, do it. You want to go into human, you want to, take up torturing people and being a Nazi, do it. It doesn't matter at that point because it's all the same to you. And you know for a fact it's all the same, as opposed to having some interpretive delusion that it's all the same. It's more psychosis than... So in other words, if you discover what the actual condition is, what the actual framework of your experience is, you will discover that any subcondition that appears within it is just it itself, is not better or worse. It's like when you discover that you're dreaming, any dream you have is just a dream, so it's not better or worse. If you go lucid in a dream, if it's a nightmare, you don't give a shit. You say, oh, there's a monster coming to get me. Great, what a hoot. As opposed to, oh no, the monster's coming to get me. What am I doing? I run away. So, discovering the actual condition is analogous to going lucid in a dream, because you discover the actual framework of what's the actual event that is occurring, which renders the seeming importance of the sub-events that seem to be occurring within that experience as essentially irrelevant, all the same.
Would you just restate, when you're having a dream, and whatever's happening in the dream, if you know you're having the dream, it doesn't matter what's happening.
That's my experience. Have you ever had that experience? You ever had a lucid experience or partial lucidity in a dream? Where you're dreaming and you realize, wait a minute, this is a dream.
No.
You never have. Well, in that case, the example is not useful to you. I said, in that case, the example is not useful to you.
But if I'm understanding if our life is just like, because I was noticing this lately, I wake up and I realize, wow, that dream just seems so real.
Mm-hmm, of course. Dreams are just as real as waking life.
They are.
Yeah. They may not seem to be from the waking state, but that's because you're not looking at the dream, you're looking at your memory of the dream, which is fuzzy.
Yeah.
But dreams themselves are not necessarily fuzzy. Dreams can be exactly as short and precise and detailed
Totally.
as you're
So this
experiencing
is
now.
what really kind of led to my question, which
Yeah.
I don't even know what it is. It's like, holy crap,
Yeah.
that was real when I was in it.
Sure. Of course.
But so what
It is
you're
real.
saying-
Dreams are real, but what they are is real dreams.
The real dreams, and I don't want to just kind of tout something right now. I can see myself right on the verge of like touting something, but so in this life that I call Nancy's life, I mean, it seems like maybe no different.
It's essentially no different. Which is not saying that this is exactly the same as a sleeping dream, but when you get down to basics, they're exactly identical. What happens here matters as much and as little as what happened in your dream last night.
And so that's the point that I want to come back to, is like, if I can, it's really just about seeing. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't.
Yeah,
Okay,
doesn't matter.
So I have to really get to that place where, you lose your wallet and all your identification, and it's like, this is just part of the dream.
Well, look at it this way. In the flow of events, things seem to happen, which seems to lead to other things seeming to happen, which seems to lead to other things seeming to happen, which seems to lead to other things seeming to happen. You get in the flow here, which seems to lead to other things seeming to happen, which seems to lead to other things seeming to happen. Now, anything can seem to happen, but whatever it is will move into seeming like something else happening, inevitably and instantaneously. So you lose your wallet, something happens, you phone the credit card companies, or you don't. You find it, or you don't. Someone steals your identity from it, or they don't. And whatever happens there leads to something else happening, which leads to something else happening, think of what happened to you when you were in third grade. That happened, but how relevant is it? It's gone. And in actual fact, what happened 1 second ago is just as gone as what happened to you when you were in third grade. So horrible things can happen. You can be walking across the street and you notice you're about to be hit by a car. Wow! I mean, that's big, okay? That's bigger than losing your wallet, one might argue. But what happens then? Well, maybe you get out of the way, maybe you don't. Maybe the car hits you. What happens then? Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Something always happens. It's never the case that nothing happens.
So coming back to this, one thing isn't better than another. That's what I'm trying to.
Well, we're flirting with that from a different angle.
Uh-huh.
We're flirting with that very issue. The reason why one thing isn't better than another is because there is no actual one thing versus any actual other thing. Because the one thing and the other thing is just virtual freeze frames in a continual flow, which is already gone.
Yeah, it felt like musical chairs.
Yeah, musical chairs, exactly. So you sit in a chair, then you get up and you're not in the chair anymore. So how important is that chair at that point?
Wow, to see if our whole life is really musical chair.
Check it out. You move from one seeming situation to another instantaneously. Like the past isn't gone in an hour or in 5 minutes or in a minute or in a second. It's gone now. What I just said when I started saying the sentence is utterly gone, completely. Any word I say, as soon as I'm saying it, the start of that saying is utterly and completely gone. So how important is it?
So as a psychotherapist, Nancy, I just have this question when you talked about third grade. So that part wants to say, well, something happened, you had this kind of impactful experience, and now it's part of the baggage.
Sure.
So help me integrate that into...
Because there's no actual baggage as part of. It's a continual morphing with absolute instability. Any baggage you have is not actually static or stable. It's continually morphing and evolving as the ongoing real-time condition of your energy system, let's call it. right? So your emotional state right now is impacted by all, let's say it's impacted by all your previous experience, but it's also being impacted by what's happening right now, so it's morphing. Everything continually morphs. It's like the present state of affairs completely and utterly morphs into the next state of affairs in real time. And the previous states are all gone.
So yes, they're gone, and yet one can say, well, the kid has this memory of something that happened in 3rd grade that he's carrying today, and it's affecting.
Well, you can't say it's affecting. You can have that theory, but that theory is an oversimplification. All interpretive frameworks are gross oversimplifications. They're not necessarily untrue.
That would change a lot of things.
Yeah, look at it. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Look at it. Oversimplifications aren't untrue. They just aren't, since they're not complete, they're not true. So, reality is not other than your idea of it. It's just more than your idea of it. I mean, the idea that you're here in a talk, sitting in a chair, having a talk, and it's and this is Seattle, and it's Saturday, and it's such and such o'clock, and all that is true as far as it goes. But the actuality is much, 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 much more than that. And that moreness renders those apparent facts, those apparent conditions, as essentially irrelevant. Just like if you discover you're dreaming, that moreness renders the seeming relevance of the conditions that are happening in the dream relatively irrelevant. They're not true. Yeah, you're still running away from a monster, maybe, whatever, right? But it's all of a sudden that's the information which is actually always available, that in actual fact this is a dream. It kind of sheds a vast perspective on the seeming conditions in the dream, which utterly shifts their relative importance. And in exactly the same way, when you see the fullness of what's actually going on here, it doesn't invalidate our partial interpretive frameworks. It's just so much more that it renders them virtually irrelevant.
So going back to the thing about the hierarchy, it seems like suffering. I part of what keeps it sort of apparently like locked in is thinking I know what it is.
Exactly.
And I don't know what it is.
Exactly. Suffering, first of all, suffering is always holding a fantasy. Suffering is always, basically, think exactly as you say, thinking you know what something is, thinking that something is undesirable, and holding it to be actual, or actual in the future, in the past, or in the present, which is irrelevant. You're just holding it to be actual. And so there's this actual condition which is not good, and so you suffer as a result of it. But it's the holding of that's being actively held in imagination, not necessarily deliberately, it might be unconsciously, but it's being actively held and basically essentially recreated in real time to maintain an illusion of consistency, of duration, right? And the fact is, you cannot know what any condition actually is, because it's just for no other reason, just because there's too much information. Let alone because the information itself is transcendental, which is the case. But even leaving that aside, that huge fact aside, there's just too much information. You can't know what's going on. So any fantasy you have of what a condition is, any interpretation or definition or idea you have about what a condition is, like, oh God, I'm screwed because of X, Y, Z, because I've got a health problem, or whatever the suffering is, the worrying is, whatever. You're relating to a simplification. You're relating to a way of holding it as being, and the actual condition has elements which are not being included in that fantasy. Has to. Situations are just to have too much information in them to get all the facts. It's like if I said, can you describe exactly what's happening right now in your experience? Every color you're seeing, every shape you're seeing, every nuance of thought you're thinking, every sensation if you had the rest of time and the linguistic skills to write out a list of catalogs of, I'm seeing this shade of red here, and next to it is a slightly different shade of red, and next to it is a slightly different shade of red. So you go on for that for about a year till you've exhausted all the shades of red and a little blob of red on your shirt, and then move on to the next one. I mean, look at it. You can't. What's actually happening is too information dense, too information rich to know what it really is. So these modelings are vast oversimplifications. You create a caricature. And a caricature is not the thing. Like you ever had one of those caricatures done by these guys in the parks and stuff that this is you. It's like, oh, that's funny, yeah, it kind of looks like me. It doesn't. You look different. The caricature would have to be a photograph, and you look different than that. The photograph would have to be an ultra-high resolution photograph with technology that hasn't been invented, and you look different than that. So, the amount of information that's actually present in a real experience cannot be collapsed down into a soundbite, into a fantasy. So all this suffering is basically orienting to oversimplified fantasies of, it's catastrophizing. Mm-hmm. Oh, woe is me because of X, Y, Z. And hoping is the same thing. You aspire to something, you hope for something. What you're hoping for and aspiring to is a vast oversimplification. Even if you got it, it would be different from what you thought you were going to get, or what you hoped you were going to get. I mean, that's inevitably the case, right? Nothing ever happens the way you expect. Exactly. The more general you are with it, the more you can say, well, I was pretty sure I was going to be here at 10 to do a talk. And yeah, I was here at 10 to do a talk. That's very general. If I look at exactly what I was experiencing in my experiential field at precisely 10 o'clock internet time, I could not predict any color that was appearing in my field of vision. I could not predict what was appearing in my field of thought. I could not predict what I was feeling in my body. So when you get down to the specifics, it's always completely beyond expectation. So the only way expectation can be meaningful is just by being really, 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 really general, which is exactly what we do. But then we react emotionally to the generalization as if it was true, and suffering.
What is the cause of the seeming suffering after liberation happens?
There isn't any.
Well, you hear about these people taking 7, 12, so many years to sort of everything getting on board.
Right. That's true. That's true. In the process of let's call it spiritual unfoldment, there is a great deal of process that could be called integration. It's a kind of like you say, getting on board, which is works. But it's really kind of how to put it. It's kind of finishing taking inventory in a way. Suppose you inherited a warehouse. You had an unknown uncle that died, and he left you this vast warehouse just full of all kinds of junk, and you have no idea what it's full of. Mm-hmm. And so all of a sudden you've got the warehouse, and you can look at it and go, yeah, I've got this. Wow, it's mine. But you don't know exactly what it is. So you have to go through it piece by piece and inventory and figure it all out. And eventually you know exactly what you've got. And so it's kind of like that. Any degree of realization is wow, you've seen the warehouse. But then there's a kind of yeah, it's right here. It's for real, and you get the whole impact and sort of flavor of it. But then there's a kind of a doing the math of just really really getting down to details, getting down to cases, and sort of going out into every little ramification and nook and cranny, and then yep, and then you sort of cross everything off the list.
Does that happen by itself?
Yes.
It's just
It's intrinsic.
It's a body and more.
All that.
All
that. But
it just takes time. It doesn't all sort of get it.
Well, it seems to take time. It doesn't actually necessarily take time.
Yeah.
Because again, what's really happening is inconceivable.
But if there is any suffering from the shock of that transition.
No suffering.
It just doesn't have duration, right?
Whether or not it has duration, there's no suffering. There can be all kinds of call it qualitative impact, but it's not necessarily suffering. It might look like suffering from the outside, but that doesn't mean it's suffering. Because in realization, one discovers that there's nothing present but unqualifiable energy. It looks like all this stuff, but it's actually unqualifiable energy. And you can't suffer about unqualifiable energy. You can get wow, you can be whammied by it, you can, get knocked around by it, but you can't suffer.
In my experience of having what I identified as myself fall away, I spent a period of time kind of grasping for some sense of what used to be. Like it was all gone.
Sure.
And that period of time, I'd have to say, was a suffering.
Yeah, but the suffering wasn't the fault self falling away. The suffering was trying to replace it by going back.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of like, holy shit. Yeah. Just looking for some perspective.
Yeah, but there is no perspective. Looking for perspective is looking for delusion.
Yeah.
The reality has no perspective but itself, and virtually no perspective because it's infinite. So letting go of perspective is what finding reality looks like. As long as there's perspective, you're supplying it in your imagination, essentially.
Yeah. Yes.
So when you get perspective ripped away and you start grabbing for some perspective, you're trying to climb back in the room, so to speak. You're trying to reduce the thought.
Where the fuck am I? This is shocking, and but I felt anguish because I can remember being with a group of friends, and I can remember how I sounded, and how I sounded was like, holy fuck.
Yeah. Well, it's a holy fuck experience for sure.
Yeah.
Technically speaking.
Yeah.
But again, that energy experience can look like suffering, but that doesn't make it suffering. Here's a big suffering isn't even really suffering. Suffering is really transcendental energy.
I think that's what I meant by it's suffering, but it doesn't have any duration. Because it's not like it's suffering into another moment, into another moment.
Yeah. Interpreting suffering as suffering is suffering. But when you see that suffering is transcendental energy, it's no longer suffering.
Yeah.
So you can be sitting here depressed in a corner with tears streaming down your face about to slash your wrists and be in transcendental bliss. Because that's where you are. And you can see that that's where you are. And of course, once you see that's where you are, the whole slash your wrists, depression thing tends to dissipate, or not. But it's irrelevant what it looks like at that point.
Well, it's like if you don't feel like there's somebody here who is suffering,
sure,
then it's different.
Yeah.
It's just nothing.
Sure. I mean, the subjective pole is seen through, but the objective pole is seen through simultaneously because they're one and the same. So you discover there's no one here, and you discover there's nothing here, and it's just this infinite field of transcendental energy, as I poetically put it. Sounds good. But, yeah. But all of this, we're sort of dancing around an interesting topic, which is the nature of the process of unfoldment. I mean, the fact that you all are here means that you are in the process of unfoldment. The fact that you're alive actually means that you're in the process of unfoldment, because life itself is the spiritual path. Life itself is, life is unfolding to itself. That's what's going on here, you could say. But at any rate, the mechanism of unfoldment looks as if it has two aspects that are sort of reciprocal and complementary. There's the aspect of revelation, and there's the aspect of integration. And revelation always presents to some degree of wow factor, some degree of holy shit, or whatever, right? And integration is the ensuing repercussions of that experience, which may look like for example, as you described, a kind of a going back, or trying to go back, or whatever it looks like. But at any rate, that is an intrinsic aspect of unfoldment. There's these sort of quantum leaps of revelation. There can be little hiccups that can happen every second or every nanosecond, or there can be vast big ones that happen every 20 years or whatever. It's irrelevant. But it's always some degree of revelation events, let's call it. And then there's always some degree of integration events, which are typically seeming reactions or aftermath of the revelations. And that's always the case. So, and it's intrinsic, again, in the way this works, apparently. So, typically, from a spiritual point of view, we're focused on the revelations, like, wow, I want that. But the integration that comes with it is part of it too, and can look very different than the revelation. And, it's easy to think in terms of, partial failed revelations and then the big revelation, but it's not actually like that. Every revelation is for real. And realization per se is just a kind of a tipping point of the scales going from one side to the other side. It's like every revelation you're sort of you're dropping a little weight and the scale is up. And eventually it gets to a point where it goes, and then you're still dropping the weights. The weights are continually dropping forever. So there's kind of an arbitrary line in the sand that can be said to be realization, but it's not actually a special event at all. It's just an arbitrary point in an ongoing and eternal accumulation of these revelation integration events, which is the very nature of consciousness, the very nature of life.
Could we verbalize this, dropping these weights, seeing through things, like seeing?
Sure. I'm analogizing, every dropping of a weight is like a flash of revelation, a flash of insight, a flash of, oh wow, whatever. It doesn't matter how you characterize it, they are what they are.
Wanting to see if my word matched with yours.
Yeah, well, the words aren't too important, but it's, so this, and revelation and integration are both important. And they're also both basically automatic, they're intrinsic. It's not like you have a lot of control over it. But again, don't let the fact that you can't participate in it stop you from participating in it. Don't let the fact that you can't deliberately do it stop you from deliberately doing it. So, because all of that is just more theorizing, and all theory is bullshit. So you can participate and engage with all this stuff as much as you want, and leave it to the philosophers as whether you're actually doing anything or not. Am I doing this, or is it happening through me? What does that even mean?
So the realization is sort of an arbitrary thing. It's like sometimes I think there's the idea out there that, well, there's this threshold that we need to attain.
Right.
To this one point, and once that's the point. But it's not. That's just an arbitrary notion. Maybe there's no threshold at all. It's just like it's happening here.
Well, first of all, both are true in a way. There is a very real fact of realization, and when one is realized, one knows it very clearly and obviously. It's not like something like, am I realized? But having said that, again, it's not actually a separate event from any other event, because everything that leads up to realization is a progression of realizations. And after realization, everything that happens is a progression of realizations. But again, there's this kind of tipping point that is, it's a big deal in a sense, but it's not a goal and it's not an end. And it's not even really an achievement. It's just a fact. I mean, you could analogize it maybe to birth. If you look at the biological functioning of a fetus, there's all these cells multiplicating and developing, and all of this biology developing and all this. And then there's the crisis of birth, and then there's all these cells multiplying and dividing and biology systems going on. So what's going on before birth is essentially the same thing as going on after birth. So birth, in a sense, passing out of the womb is kind of an arbitrary demarcation, and yet it's at the same time as saying that it's a big deal. It's a big change. So in one sense, it's not a change. In another sense, it's a big change. So it's kind of it's not worth worrying about. It's certainly not a goal. It's just a fact when it occurs. It's observable, like wow. But having said that, it's because it's not an end. It's just a point. It's like death or birth. At a certain point, you're before birth, and then there's birth, and then you're after birth, and that's clearly true. But the essential process, both before and after birth, is the same process, and it's ongoing. And so, likewise with before and after realization, likewise with before and after death. So again, in terms of spirituality, it's very easy to have enlightenment as this big carrot on the string, and but again, that's just more gamesmanship of the grass is greener, and that's where the green grass is over there. There's enlightenment. I want that carrot, and it's understandable. But of course, the very holding it that way is part of the problem. It's in the way of it itself. Because all of this dualizing of playing one condition off against another goes against the very nature of what this is. So it's alien to seeing what this is, or it's a mode that is intrinsically contradictory to the mode that actuality is in. Where in actuality, everything is different than everything else, but nothing is better than anything else. It's all the same stuff. And so this mode of holding something is better than another is a delusion. It's an inherently wrong, erroneous mode. And so holding it that way is a way of just sort of reinforcing, being with this other than the way it actually is.
Yeah, some will say, well, the only thing that's stopping you from being enlightened is thinking that you're not already enlightened.
In a sense, but it's not a thought. But basically that's true. Basically, enlightenment is simply the perception of the condition that is and it's always been the case. So everyone is already always in the condition that they will be in when they're enlightened, but when you're enlightened you know it. When you're enlightened you don't know it. Or let's say you see it, it's better than saying you know it. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of calling it realization is better than enlightenment, because you're realizing what you are, and the condition of unrealization is not realizing what you are. You are what you are before and after realization. Nothing has actually changed. But you see what it is in realization, and before realization you misinterpret it. You are it, but you don't recognize it, so you're confused about it.
Do you actually realize who you are, or is it a mystery? Like you say, you don't know anything.
Well, both.
Can you even know what you are?
Both. I mean, you are a mystery, but you know that that's who you are, and you know that that's what you are, with absolute certainty and clarity. So you know the actuality of mystery is not a failure to know. Mystery is the actuality, the nature of the actuality, and it can be directly and clearly known. Or instead of calling it mystery, let's call it infinity. We imagine we're finite in some sense, i.e. definable. And when we discover we're indefinable, it seems very different, even though we've been infinite all along, just we're defining ourselves as finite.
Picture or image that comes to mind is that you're standing by the ocean and the sun is reflecting off the water and you see the waves down there. You get into that experience without there's no thought. You really feel that experience, and it's like that same kind of quality is applied to everything, and you're in the same place. Then that's a good place. The way of describing what it's like.
Well, experience is infinite energy presence, or let's call it unresolvable or undefinable energy presence. And when you recognize that, and there's nothing but that, you are that, the world is that, all circumstances are that, everything you ever thought was not that is that, you recognize that and all of a sudden it feels like a different ballgame. It's not different, because it's always been that, but recognizing that that's the case enables you to appreciate it. And basically frees you from the erroneous implications of imagining that it's other than that.
And yet the other part is still there.
Sure. Nothing is changed, nothing is gained, nothing is lost, but it's rendered in its true perspective. You know, the mind is rendered in its true perspective as an averager. It's an averaging interpretation device. It's like, you know what the mind is just like? The mind is just like hypothetical scenario developers at the War Department. That's exactly what the mind is like. You know, at the War Department, they probably have 50 different plans for invading Dublin. Not that they're planning to invade Dublin, but if we ever needed to, they could say, okay, let's do 47, and we got it on the table, it's ready to go. And when they actually invade Dublin, it's going to be different than the plan, because they're going to encounter specifics that cannot be included in the plan. So the reality transcends the plan. But the mind endlessly spins out these plans, which are, in this case, they're theories of what's going on. Maybe I'm in a body, maybe this is a space, maybe I'm in time, maybe I'm in causality, maybe I'm a separate, limited person partial to outside influences, maybe there's other beings here who are independent from me, maybe this, maybe that, maybe the other. So these are just like hypothetical scenarios that the mind just churns out effortlessly and spontaneously. It's never going to stop, it's what it does. You know, as long as your brain works, your mind is going to be churning this stuff out. Interestingly enough, once your brain stops, it might be different, but it won't be a cessation of event.
Could you say more about that? Just elaborate. Once your brain stops, while we're still alive.
Yeah. Well, it's something that's better to look and see for yourself, but I can talk about it. I would say don't take what I'm saying because I say it. Look for yourself and see what you can find out about it. But basically what's going on here is beyond space and time and beyond event. And yet there is apparent space and time and apparent event as far as there is, let's say, in partial aspect of things. Like in the sense that a dream occurs in deep sleep. So deep sleep is present even though it looks like the dream, but there's also deep sleep present at the same time, even though it's perhaps less apparent. Now, a large part of the functioning can be said to be harmonically related to physiological functioning, i.e. your brain functioning. You know, if you take a psychoactive drug or you get an injury to your head, it affects a certain amount of your experience, the way your brain functions and so on and so forth. The way your thought functions, the way the physiological aspects of your brain function. But consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain. The brain, if you want to look at it in materialist terms, you can look at the body and the brain as like a radio receiver. The radio receiver needs to be there to receive the signal, but the signal has to be there to be received, and the signal is not dependent upon the radio, the other way around. So, here's the radio, and it's receiving the signal, and the radio broadcast is coming through. What happens when you smash the radio? No more broadcast coming through, but the signal doesn't stop. So, a part of you, in fact, a vast part of you, is beyond your physiology, beyond your body. But the body has its own functioning within its bandwidth. and it serves to step down that infinite program to the finite thing that we think of as our physical experience. And if you look closely at your experience, the dimensions of your experience, and think of it, the layers or stratas of your experience, you'll notice this. You can find like the 5 sense fields, and then you can find the mind as a product of physical thought. And then you'll start finding, when you become more sensitive to these presences in the way they are present, the texture of them, you'll start finding subtler and subtler layers that are there too, that aren't sensory, and they aren't mental in the sense of thought, but there's something going on there. And as you keep going up, you eventually get to a point where it's clearly not physiological. It's clearly beyond the body. Because these layers don't change anything that changes when you awake or go to sleep is body-oriented, but a great deal of your energy system doesn't change between when you awake and go to sleep. And this is directly discoverable experientially. So these portions of, let's say when you get above a certain subtle layer of bandwidth, let's call it, you get to a point where you're beyond your physiology, you're beyond the body. And so when the body gets sick, everything below the point of physiological based functioning is affected, but the parts above aren't. So you get direct experience of what doesn't change when the physiological aspects change. And when you die, the same thing is going to happen. The physiological aspects may shut down, but it's like smashing the radio. The program hasn't stopped. And the presence of a radio program is a gestalt of the program in the ether, and then the physical radio that channels it into a physical radio program. So anyway, that's sort of an analogy of it. But all that's just theory and verbiage. I suggest you investigate it yourself.
Sort of related to that, I think, in a way, is that you were saying presence always shows up in a costume. And sort of what came to me is, the Taoists talk about manifest and unmanifest.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a description of the manifest. But I was wondering if it's also a description, like is the unmanifest presence?
There's not a manifest versus an unmanifest. Any aspect of actuality has what's called manifest aspects and unmanifest aspects. It's not a simple delineation or like a line where on one side of the line is manifest and on the other side of the line it's not manifest. It's greater than that. It's a continuum. Every aspect.
I understand that, but I kind of don't.
Well, it's not understandable, just look and see. It's not understandable, but it's experienceable.
So there's not any big unmanifest and then everything else is manifest?
No, it's not like that.
Right.
Because there's no this and versus that. Anything is a holographic inclusion of the whole.
Right.
So it's weirder than that. It's not like there's a here and a there, where here is one way and there is another way. There's an anywhere, and anywhere is a point of focus that opens to everywhere. So any point you go to, you find manifest and unmanifest, because you find everything there. Because this is not, even though like in the previous example I was phrasing it as if it's a stratification, but it isn't actually like that. You can experientially play with it and approach it like that as an experiment. It can be a useful kind of a trick, but it's not actually true. It's weirder than that. Reality has, it doesn't actually, but if you could say it more truly has what might be called a holographic orientation. So every point is all of it. Every point is everything while being exactly itself. And then the next point next to it is exactly itself and is also everything. So, and of course,
everything
the way that works.
Being manifest and unmanifest together.
Yeah, but not as a mishmash either, as an infinite dimensionalities. You can't pin it down. You can't form a map of it. You can't form a stable geometry of it that has consistency. It's weirder than that.
Yeah, but what you can say for sure is that there is not a massive unmanifest and then something manifested
No.
out of the unmanifest.
No. There, in a way there is, but it's not a there and a here. The unmanifest is right here, the manifest is right here, the manifest is manifesting out of the unmanifest right here, and it's all happening now. So there's no, I mean, you know, this is the presence, this is the radiance. The radiance emerges within the presence, and it's all happening right here, everywhere. Right, it's happening right here, and right there, and right there, and everywhere. So the center of reality is anywhere you choose, anywhere you look. And the circumference of reality is anywhere you look. The beginning of reality is anywhere you look. The end of reality is anywhere you look.
So right here is the manifest presence.
Sure. Always.
And the unmanifest.
Yeah, but there's no and. Manifest presence equals unmanifest presence.
No separation.
I don't know why I'm not getting that.
When you verbalize it verbalizes as if it's two things, but there's no two things.
Yeah.
It's weirder than that.
Do you get the unmanifest?
What's to get?
Yeah, well.
This is the unmanifest. You know, this is absolutely nothing. This is everything.
Oh, is the unmanifest the same as nothing?
I don't know. Depends what you mean by nothing.
No, you
Depends what you mean by
emptiness?
unmanifest. Sure, emptiness. Emptiness is right here. This is completely empty.
Yeah.
And it's also completely full.
Yeah.
And the fullness is the emptiness, and the emptiness is the fullness.
Yeah. And is
You
that
ever heard the Heart Sutra?
Yeah, I sure have.
Yeah. Well, then that's that litany.
But is that the same
Sure.
as manifest unmanifest? Is it
Sure.
the same discussion? Okay.
There's only one thing, and it only exists in one way. But that one way is infinite and transcendental and undefinable. So there's not a manifest and an unmanifest. You're talking about one thing that exists in one way as if it was a this and a that, as if you had parts that you could see how they fit together, and it doesn't actually have any parts.
Yes.
And yet, it effortlessly includes all of its aspects. So it has an aspect of being absolutely nothing, so yeah, it's nothing. It has an aspect of being absolutely everything, so yeah, it's everything. But that doesn't mean there's an everything and a nothing that are in some relationship to each other.
Right.
It just means that what it is what shows up as nothing, and what it is what shows up as everything. What it is what shows up as transcendentality. What it is what shows up as dull normalcy.
Yeah.
And confusion.
Yeah. I think when you took it into the Heart Sutra, then something just went for me.
Yeah, the Heart Sutra is very good.
Yeah.
As far as writing goes, the Heart Sutra is pretty much up there.
Yeah.
You know, it bears a certain amount of study.
Yeah. Thank you.
Where is that from?
It's a traditional Buddhist text. You've probably heard it quoted. The core of it goes something like, the form is the void, and the void is the form. The form is not other than the void, and the void is not other than the form. And then it goes on to specific elaborations of that paradox.
So probably just a Google Heart Sutra.
Yeah. Google Heart Sutra, you had 10,000 hits.
Did you put it on your website?
Might have, I don't know, don't recall.
Might be there.
Yeah, I think I might have done in a moment of weakness. Well, look at that, it's lunchtime. Second best time of day. So I'm going to leave, online people, I'm going to leave the broadcast on because it's already on, and what the heck. And it's 12, so we'll be back here in we're going to resume at about 1:15 Pacific time. So, please, it's lunchtime, so enjoy yourselves, and let's resume about 1:15, which is about an hour and 10 minutes from now, loosely. And the sooner we resume, the more time we have to spend together. But hey, whatever you guys want, I'm loose. I like your shoelaces.
Yeah,
Right. Wakey, wakey.
well, I bought the shoes and then I discovered why they were so cheap, because the shoelaces weren't long enough for my feet.